I just can't believe how close it is to you.
Crime is everywhere and consistently on the rise. Quick and easy cases are solved daily, but what of those other cases? The ones that have gone cold with no new leads or information. The famous serial killers have been captured and made public. But what of those still on the loose? Or even worse, still killing? Welcome to the realm of darkness. Your host, Rainey and Ashley, will be your guides into the mysterious world of true crime cases and stories. Here are your hosts, Rainey and Ashley.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Realm of Darkness. Unfortunately, Rainey is not able to join us tonight, but I do have a special co-host, Katie. She is going to join me to talk to you guys about the disgusting and awful Sexton family from Ohio. So we're going to go ahead and just, dive right into that.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
Eddie Lee Sexton. He was one of, I think, 12 or 13 children, and he was raised on a farm. He was one of the younger ones. And even when he was little, they said that he used to hang chickens and cut their heads off for fun. And he did a lot of these weird, different acts that in today's world would be considered kind of almost like a signs of a psychopath. And no one really thought anything. They just thought he was a bad kid, and he kind of acted out. And eventually he ended up spending 5 years in jail for robbery. And shortly after that is when he met his wife, Estella. They got married. He told her that he was from the military and that's why he was gone for 5 years and all this stuff. So long story short,
number one.
Right. So long story short, they ended up having 12 children. 5 of them were girls. And my personal opinion after kind of reading into this is that 12 children, 12 disciples. I don't know what you think about that or if it's just ironic. But
there's a lot of things that we can correlate as you dive into this that you can start to see numbers. So anyone that's into numerology, you're gonna start to see some numbers come up.
Yes. So hi Nicole. I just saw her pop in. So he had these 12 children, and he was all about being in the church, and he would go to church, and even his dad was actually a minister at one point.
Yep.
So he would go and he would do these teachings and these readings, and he would read the gospel, and he started to actually gain a lot of people and get a pretty good following. And eventually I think it kind of got to his head, and he wanted to be more of a leader, and he started putting in cult type of things. He would talk about how he was Jesus reborn, and he was the leader, and he was sent to lead the people. And then he would start doing really weird things. And Katie, I know you love cats, but one of the things
this broke me, so just rip the Band-Aid off. So go ahead.
As soon as I saw this, I thought of you. But to try to instill fear in his children and to try to turn into more of a cult aspect, he would do rituals, and they were more worshiping of Satan, very satanic rituals. And he would take cats and he would bring them in on a silver platter in front of his children of all ages, and he would murder the cat. Then he would pour the cat's blood into a goblet, and he would make his children drink this while worshiping Satan and while kind of making them chant and say things that they weren't really sure what they were saying.
No, they did it out of fear. And the worst part was
Yeah.
is that it wasn't just neighborhood cats. The hardest one was it was their own cat Misty. So this was
Yes.
this beautiful family pet that
Yeah.
he murdered, put under a blanket, and then essentially was like, "Hey, guess what we're doing for dinner?"
We're killing our cat and
Yeah,
drinking her blood.
yeah.
Yes.
Like I've already done this, and then not even a proper burial. Just put it in the garbage can. It was like,
Yeah.
"I'm going to bed."
Like out like Friday
Yeah,
night trash.
yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think this was the beginning of a lot of the torture for his family. I don't know with the viewers watching how much they actually know, but I hope you guys are ready because it gets a little disturbing. So he had 12 children, 5 of them were girls, and he believed that he was almost kind of the best race, and he wanted to keep everything in the family. He thought that his bloodline was pure. So he would arrange these marriages between his daughters and himself, and he would have his wife kind of almost be like the minister, and he would have the rest of the children attend. And I think the very first one that he ended up marrying was Pixie.
Mhm.
And he had a whole ceremony. He married her, the whole you may kiss your bride, kissed her, and then actually took her on a honeymoon and took her and his wife into a bedroom and had a threesome with his own daughter. Um, and unfortunately, Pixie did eventually, in high school, she eventually had 2 children from her father, who was
10th
Eddie.
10th grade, I think, was the first one, and then
Yeah.
senior year, I believe,
Yeah.
was the second.
Yep. And the sad part is she had 2 daughters.
Yep.
So that unfortunately, yeah. And then a little bit later, he ended up having Sherry marry him as well. Now, thankfully, Sherry never had any children with her father, but he did have sexual relations with her, and I think that's just kind of where the abuse started. There were boys in the family, and to kind of give his dominance over this family and to keep them in fear, he would beat them. He had a rule that was under 15, you get the belt, over 15, you get the fist. So he would beat them with belts, he would beat them with shoes, he would fist
Whatever was
fight
handy.
them. Yes.
Yep.
And then at night, to make sure that they were scared of him, he would rape his own boys to make sure that they stayed in line. And if they acted out, or if he ever thought they would tell somebody, he had these rooms that were pitch black, no electricity in them, no food, no water, and he would lock them in there, and he would make them sit in their own feces and their own waste, and they would just sit there until he was ready to let them out. And as a
Jeez.
mother, like, I cannot imagine.
No. I felt bad enough as a mom and a single mom, putting my kid in timeout on like a stool or the bottom step of our stairs. I couldn't imagine being like, "Here, I'm just gonna lock you in this room
Right.
until dot dot dot." Like,
Yes.
that's just mind blowing to me that you could do
Right.
that as a parent.
Well, and then with the abuse for the children, I mean, not only did he physically, I'm going to say rape, whether
Yeah. No, that's what it is. Call it what it
right,
is.
whether the children were manipulated or brainwashed or whatever, because at one point they do say that Pixie truly believed she was in love with her father, and
Oh
she
yeah.
truly wanted to be with him as a spouse. And to me, that's brainwashed. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a baby, but
Yep.
the fact that you have 12 children and you are raping every single one of these children of all different ages. And then not only that, but he actually convinced his wife to also have sexual relations with the boys in the family.
Yep.
So not only were these men, or these boys, I should say, they were children, get raped by their father, but now they're also sleeping with their mother.
Yep.
You know,
And again, to think that this is totally normal and that
yes,
every family does this. And that was the hardest part in researching all of this, is to think that I'm going to school and I'm what I think is a normal 10-year-old hanging out with my friends, and then accidentally say something or not say something and have someone go,
mhm,
"Well, that's weird. You kiss your mom on the lips," or, "Oh, you do this," and be like,
mhm,
"No, I don't. I was just kidding." Like, think of that
yeah,
peer pressure. And then the fear of being called out, the fear of someone finding out, the fear of, "Oh my God, if someone finds out, what's my dad going to do to me? How
yeah,
long am I going to get locked in the room?" Like, that psychological warfare on
yeah,
like just layering. your
Well,
entire life.
and not only that, but even with some of the children being so little, like, there were things that I saw where he would make them perform oral sex on him, or he would do it for them, and
Yeah.
I just I don't know. I just cannot fathom the idea of being in high school or even elementary school and truly believing that every family does
That
this,
was normal. Yep.
and that I think that was the hardest part about reading it is they really truly thought that that's how every family was, and every dad
Yep.
was this way and every mom was that way, and it
Well, and
it
again,
was really
being
sad.
being raised in what you thought was a church and
Mhm.
having your dad call himself a minister and all these things, you think you're doing the Lord's work. You think you're
Mhm.
doing what's right. And then to find out later, none of that is true. Again, that
Right.
kind of mind blown moment of like, wait a minute, this
Well,
isn't what this is. This isn't what this does. Like, I can't even imagine.
yeah. Well, and think of how hard it would be. I mean, you're right. You're raised in this church. You're taught that God is real and Jesus is real because he did. He taught about God, Jesus, Mary, Joseph,
Yeah,
the whole nine
initially,
yards.
absolutely.
Yes, but then he also teaches about Satan, not in the way that the Catholic Church would want you to teach about him, but
Right.
then, you turn 17 and you find out sleeping with your parents is not normal. God, if he's real, why did he let you go through this?
Right.
Now, is it real or is this another one of your dad's brainwashing schemes?
Right.
I mean,
What's real?
I could not imagine being such an impressionable young adult going into the world and literally having no clue how the world actually
No.
works.
Nope.
And then how do you have healthy relationships after that?
A lot of therapy.
You
That that'd be my guess.
I mean,
I'm still
yeah.
working on it, so
I mean, yeah, you're right, you're right. And
I don't know. I truly, that to me again was one of those moments where you're like, what is going on? And how do you even just stop thinking, okay, I'm just going to start over? But then how do you trust someone to tell you what the truth is? Like, we all know that this is the color blue. Well, how are you taught that this is blue? Well, someone you trusted taught you, well, this is what the color blue is. Imagine how that be your entire life. How do
Yeah,
I trust what a healthy relationship is, what love is, what a hug is, what I'm supposed to do with certain
mhm,
people, what religion, like all of those things that you take for granted that are basic human rights that you entrust your family to teach you is just
yeah.
gone.
Well, and then even to dig a little bit deeper into that, like Pixie, who had the 2 daughters, now kids are mean. Let's be honest, you go to school, kids are mean.
Yep.
Now you have these 2 babies who their mother is also their sister, and their dad is also their grandpa,
Right.
and then and to find all this out because growing up, they were told, which we haven't got to that part of the story yet, but they were told that this other man was their father.
Yeah.
And then, they ended up I guess we could talk about him. So Pixie, she was one of the oldest girls, and
Yep.
in her senior year, there was a boy named Joel who was very interested in her. At this point, she had already given birth to both of her daughters, who were fathered by her father. Um, but the story behind it is that Pixie told everybody that she got pregnant by a boyfriend who was in the military and he
Yep.
was never coming home.
And that was
So
number one, right? That was the first child.
that was the 2 of them.
Okay.
Yeah, the first 2. And she would tell everybody that it was this boy who was in the military. He's never coming home. He doesn't want nothing to do with the children, none of that. And then Joel started showing interest in her. And Eddie, his name is Eddie Lee Sexton, that is the father's name. Eddie told Pixie that he wanted her to go on dates with this boy. And he kind of pushed the relationship toward a more serious type of
Right.
relationship. And eventually he did have them get married. Well, when they got married, he had convinced Joel that this man really was gone and he was never coming back. So Joel, unfortunately, not the smartest decision, signed his name on both of those girls' birth certificates saying that he was the biological dad.
Yep.
So that is one way that Eddie got away with it.
Yep.
Then,
So you have this beautiful man who thinks he's doing the right
yes,
thing by these two little girls, only to
yes.
realize not that long after that you're covering for this horrific incest and just
Well,
mind-blowing lie.
the sad part is I don't know if Joel ever actually found out the truth. So once he married Pixie,
Yeah.
they ended up having a son together,
Yep.
and the son's name was Skipper. I want to say he was a colic baby, so we all know colic babies, they cry, they fuss.
Oof. If you've ever had one,
Yeah, they're not easy. And during this pregnancy and right around the time that she had given birth, one of the girls, Michelle, who is, I believe, the middle girl,
Yeah.
told somebody at school that her father was abusing her and that he had raped her, and she was scared that he was going to do it to the younger girls. So the authorities did come in. They took away all the children that were under or that were considered minors, which
Yeah. So
in
I
the
think there were
state
6
of
of them
Ohio,
at that point.
yes, and I think in the state of Ohio, technically 16 and under is considered a minor, sexually at least. So they came in and they took all the kids that were considered minors and they put them into foster care. At this point, Eddie knew that he was in trouble, so he packed up all the children that were legal and moved them to Florida. And this included Pixie, Joel, and then the new baby Skipper. Well, while they were in Florida, his brother had lived down there, so they had places to go, and they actually were in I think it was like a trailer park or a campground.
It was a campground.
Was
While
it
you're
a
talking,
campground?
I'll dig up the name. Go ahead.
Okay.
Keep going.
Yeah, so they were in a campground because I know that they had an RV that they were all
Yep.
living in. And at one point, Skipper was being a little bit fussy, which all babies do. And Eddie was on the run for, incest and molesting his children and all these other things. So he was worried that by Skipper crying, it was going to bring attention to the family. So he told Pixie to shut the baby up. And at this point, Joel was already asleep. So Pixie put her hand over the baby's mouth and pinched its nose shut, and she suffocated it. I believe Skipper was 2 months old, I think is how old he was.
Under 6 months, I do.
Yeah, I know he was under 6 months. I think he was 2, maybe 3 months old.
Yeah.
But she suffocated the baby. And after he was dead, she laid him in bed in between her and Joel. Joel woke up in the morning, saw the baby, wasn't breathing, and that Skipper was blue, and he freaked out like any normal parent would do. And Pixie couldn't give a reason on what happened and couldn't explain what happened. And they started screaming for Eddie, and Eddie runs in. And he, as the matriarch of the family, decided that they were going to bury the baby in the woods and they weren't going to tell anybody that the baby had died. And he convinced them that the baby died of SIDS. So he makes Joel bury the baby, his own son. So Joel goes out and he can't do it. And he's trying and he's trying and he finally does. And he marks the tree where the body is so he can go back to visit. And after it's done, he's a mess. He's a complete utter mess, again, like any parent would be. And he's crying and he's going on and throwing a fit. So Eddie convinces his son Willie to try to console him and take him out in the woods and just quiet him down.
And Willie had the mental capacity of an 8-year-old.
Yes. And Willie was also one of Joel's best friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
And just the backstory, it's Little Manatee River Campground in Florida.
Yes. So Willie took Joel out into the woods and he ended up strangling him. I think it was with a wire of some sort. I couldn't find out exactly what type of wire.
The picture that I saw was basically a rope with 2 handles, so a garrote, essentially.
Yes. And he ended up suffocating him. And they buried Joel's body out there as well, and he killed him. And they just acted like nothing happened. Yep. So with Joel's death, I don't know if he even knew that those 2 girls were Eddie's children.
I feel like that's one of those things that, depending on what you read, I had found an article from Sherry Sexton, one of the other daughters, and she said that he was told in a fit of anger after Skipper had died, but she really couldn't corroborate whether or not he believed it or not. But essentially, she's saying it was said, they're not yours, so don't worry about it type thing. But again, it depends on which piece of information you're looking at.
Well, and even if he knew that those children weren't his.
He had to. The timeline doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think they were like 4 or 5 when he married Pixie.
Right.
So he knew that the girls weren't his, but I don't think he knew that they were Eddie's.
Correct. Yeah. I think that was, again, one of those things where could it have been said and he just was like sex with your dad? Are you serious right now? Like that,
Right.
your sister's probably saying that because she's mad that you stole her hairbrush or something. Because I
Exactly.
I don't think I would believe it as an adult or even a
No.
young teen.
And siblings are mean. And I mean, hell, how many of us have looked at our son like, well, you're adopted, or, daddy doesn't love you, or mommy doesn't love you. We've all said mean
My
things.
my baby sister still believes she's adopted because I said it to her when she was like 7. So sorry, Em.
He-
Love you, but sorry.
yeah. So, siblings say mean things. So I think if somebody said something like, oh, well, you slept with dad, like nobody
Yeah,
would really think about it because that's
correct.
not a normal practice.
No.
But yeah, they just discarded Skipper and Joel like it was nothing. And he had so much control and so much brainwashing over Pixie that she thought it was
Killed her
fine.
kid. Yep.
She killed her own kid. She let her husband die and didn't even think anything of it. And poor Willie, like you said, he had the mental capacity of a child, and now he just killed someone, and he ended up going to jail for that murder.
Yep.
And he was not released until 2007, I believe, is when he got out.
So imagine having the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. So, you have a 5-year-old, I have an 18-year-old. I remember those days where it was like, go to your room, these and that. And to think like, oh, well, I just hurt someone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go get put in timeout and then spend time in jail in front of a courtroom, like all of those things, to then be like, wait a minute, I don't understand, but not have the mental capacity to understand what's going on around you.
Well, and that is where I think the court system should have stepped in.
Yeah.
And because this was only in the 90s. I mean, this was
94.
not. Yeah. Well, 94 is when they were arrested. Yes.
Or 92. Yeah.
Yeah. He was, arrested in 94 for the murder.
Yep.
Eddie was, at least. But yes, I mean, this wasn't that long ago. So why not do some type of mental testing on him, some type of psychological testing? I'm sure they could have seen right there that he did not have the capacity to understand truly what he was doing. And it's hard to say, should someone be punished? Because yes, violence is violence, murder is murder. But maybe he would have been better off in a mental facility where he could have gotten the help that, not only was he abused and raped and brainwashed, and now he just murdered somebody.
Yeah.
But he's also lacking in that mental capacity of being able to understand what in the hell just happened to him. Yep. And I think he could have benefited from some type of mental institute, and he didn't get that type of help.
And I think too, another son, Charlie, had advocated once he knew that his dad was arrested, that he advocated for his brother and advocated for his sisters, did everything in his power to try to help as best he could.
Yes, and actually Charles is, I believe, one of the very few children that testified against Eddie Lee in everything that he did. And I believe he testified against his mother as well. In this whole story, everything that Eddie did to his children is so horrific that people forget that his wife took part in this. Yeah. She made them drink the cat blood along with him.
She did nothing to stop it. She not only did she do things to her children and allowed it to happen, but her control and fear of her husband allowed her to really become complacent. And I feel like that's its own separate thing, but it's like, imagine that. So on top of having your own issues, to then not be able to help and understand this was not okay. And how do you?
Well, and and I'm not condoning, I'm going to sound like a real a-hole when I say this, but people who are in abusive relationships, I've never been to one, so I cannot speak for them or how it feels or how scary it is to leave. But when you have 12 children whose lives are being risked every single day, when they're in pain because their own father is raping them, when they're sitting in their own feces and waste
in a dark room
with no electricity, when they're terrified of their own family, I am sorry. I'll do the time.
Yeah.
He's got to sleep sometimes.
Yep.
And that's the thing is he wanted to make his family a cult and have them as his own type of religion, that he trained them with guns. He trained them how to fight. He trained them how to kill people. He even trained how to strangle them barehanded.
Yep.
So if it
How
came
to
down to it.
how to slit a throat, how to kill
Mhm.
with one shot, how to kill with one punch. Like,
Yes.
imagine that. Imagine your family outing, your family picnic, your reunion, whatever is, hey guys, we're gonna go and train how to,
Kill
disarm
people.
the police. Like
Yeah.
that's
Well,
mind
and
blowing.
with all the things that he taught them, I am surprised that not one person turned on him. I'm surprised because I think
Yeah,
as children, if say one of the boys would have turned and killed the father, could there have been backlash from the other children? Maybe.
sure.
But if you know how you're feeling, more than likely, if you're one of the older ones, you know how your siblings are feeling.
Yep.
And for the mother, she was trained too. So why not? This man has to go to sleep at some point. You know,
Yep.
you you can't be locked in your house 24/7. Why did you not call the police? Why did you not try to do something? And okay, yes, maybe your life would have been at risk, but you're a mother. Your job is to protect your children from people like this.
Yeah.
And I think she failed. And then to
Yeah.
let him convince her to do the things she did to her sons. Ugh.
Nope.
I definitely not winning Mother of the Year on that one for
No.
sure.
No. Again, it's that you try not to judge, you try to put yourself, but it's also like, whew, I'm never putting myself like I can't even for 1 minute step into any of those shoes.
Right.
Like keep them in that box because I can't. I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And that's
It's
the
hard.
hard part. That's why I said, I don't know what it's like to be in an abusive relationship. And I
Yeah.
know that the people who are, it is very scary trying to get out. But when that's just you, I think it's a little bit different. But when you're responsible for 12 other children,
Yep.
I think it changes the game and it's got to be, fight or flight. And maybe she just
You
didn't have
figure
the
it out.
weight. Yeah.
Yep. You figure it out no matter what you got to do. If you have to put $10 away, if you've got to,
Mhm.
sell your stuff on eBay, whatever you've got to do, you slowly start making those changes and
Well,
you
and
go
even at
from
that
there.
point, if I had children that were going through that much abuse, I would gladly do life in prison
Yeah.
for murder to get
Yep.
them out of it.
Yep.
And no jury in their right mind is going to give you death trying to protect your children.
I feel like that's where justifiable comes into play.
Yes.
I might be wrong, but I'll take my
Most people
chances.
will be like, okay,
Yep.
we'll give her a few years to make it look good, but I don't think we're going to give her life. Yeah. And it's just
And if so, I'll take it. If I know that my 12 children are safe on the outside and
Mhm.
and he has zero control over them,
Mhm.
don't visit me, pretend I don't exist, but I did the right thing.
Yes. And that is why out of this whole story, Michelle was the one who did step forward and
Yeah.
tell somebody. And he actually, which it was kind of hard. I think there was only one interview that actually said what happened, but the mother, and this is why I even though they say she was brainwashed, she's as guilty as he is. When Michelle was taken out of the home, like I said, they removed all the minors. The mother actually convinced Michelle to come home to have a conversation because she missed her. And she promised that Eddie was going to be away and that Eddie wouldn't be there. So Michelle came home and
Trusted her mother.
she trusted her mother. She came home and she planned on spending the weekend with her mom. In the middle of the night, she heard noises. She goes downstairs and her father's sitting at the table smoking a cigarette. And she
Mm-mm.
comes downstairs and he makes her sit next to him and he tells her, "You're going to tell everybody that you lied. You're going to tell everybody that you made this up." And she was so terrified that she did. She went back to the police and the detectives and told them that she lied and she made it all up. So she almost, out of fear, and I
Yeah,
can't blame her. I've
I
never
get
been
it.
in her shoes, but those children were almost placed back in that home because she recanted her story out of fear. And thank God for the detectives and the police who were onto it.
Yeah.
Most people would have been like, okay, she's a kid, she lied. But they did their job. And I know on this show we do talk about a lot about how some police don't follow through. Some police kind of let things
Yep.
fall
You
through
have
the
the good
cracks.
ones and the bad ones.
These ones did an incredible job because they did. They kept her out of the house. They kept the other ones out of the house,
Right.
Which ultimately probably saved their lives.
Yeah.
To be honest. And I do believe Pixie was actually arrested.
Yep.
She did spend time in jail for the murder of Skipper.
I want to say it was about 2.5 years, maybe.
I think so. Yeah. The Eddie Lee was arrested in 94.
Yep.
He was convicted of murder,
Yep.
and then he ended up pleading lower, and he pled second-degree murder, and he was actually only charged for 25 years, or sentenced to 25 years the first round.
Yep.
He did end up getting sentenced to death row, which he eventually died. I think he died in 2010 of natural causes. He was only 68, so he was still young. And then the mother, I do believe she died in prison as well.
Yep.
She was not put to death. She also died, I believe, of natural causes.
Yep. Unfortunately, both of them died before their sentences were able to be taken out.
Well, upstairs they'll handle it, or downstairs they'll handle it.
I'm sure that was one of those elevator rides. Like you hit one button, you went one way, and they were like,
They're like,
somebody doesn't want you. We'll figure that out.
Well, and that's the thing that baffles me about this case is Eddie Lee was raised. His dad was a pastor. He, he was a minister. He preached the Bible. He preached all these things. So you would think growing up in that type of household and knowing God and having religion taught to you, would you not at some point in all of your shenanigans be like, hey, I'm probably going to go to hell?
Yeah, but he started to worship himself instead of what he truly believed. So you have people that believe in the Bible and you have people that believe in God that understand that path and understand that walk of life. But when you start to do what he did and start to worship yourself and you start to look at things, and again, you look at the occult and you translate it to meet your own needs and not what it is, things get dark. I mean, we all, we all work in, I work in the paranormal. I do things that you start to look at other religions. I have piles of books here on all different religions and occult and this and that. And none of what Eddie believed is what these things preach. He essentially said, I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to take this and I'm going to take this and I'm going to create the religion according to Eddie. And when you start to worship yourself in any religion,
right,
that's no good. You have to believe in something. You have to look at what it is, but you cannot do what he did. So when you start to say, well, the Bible says thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet someone's wife. Well, my Bible says ... So he somewhere his mind flipped a switch that nobody could fix.
Well, and I think you're 100% right. I think you're really onto something because he did start worshiping Satan. And I wonder if and no, I didn't read this anywhere. This is my speculation, but I wonder if he truly believed that his actions on, we'll say, this plane, because, we're both in paranormal. We know different dimensions, different planes. I wonder if he truly believed that his actions on this plane would help him gain power with Satan.
Absolutely.
And if he figured if he did enough bad acts or enough evil things that maybe he would be one of Satan's right-hand man. Because I did read somewhere that he wanted people to worship him the way that people worshiped God. But
remember the story that he took his kids out to the backyard and basically destroyed a statue of Jesus.
Yes.
So you have this man who takes his entire family out and says, we don't worship this anymore. You worship me. You listen to me. I am your God. And then destroys this sacred artifact. So again, now you have fear. You have the wrong message. And you have these 12 little impressionable children who don't know what's up, what's down, left and right. Do I believe God? Do I believe Satan? Do I believe him? Like, where's the truth?
Yeah. And did you see that they took that statue and put it in the front yard?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how people would always say, like, oh, they have this weird statue of Jesus that has no hands and has been vandalized. But it was almost like he left little hints. And I don't know if he did that methodically or if he was slipping up. Because at the end of the day, he kind of, I don't want to say he was a genius. I would not put him on that level. But
he was maniacal. He
Yes.
did just enough. You see a statue broken and you go, "Oh, a
Yes.
tree branch fell on it. Oh, it must have gotten knocked over. Oh, somebody must have backed into it with the lawnmower." You don't think because you didn't see the destruction behind it.
Right.
But if you as a kid were like, "Hey friend, why do you have this statue?" "Oh, my dad cut the arms off to scare the crap out of us." That's
Right. And
totally
then put it
different.
in the front
Right.
yard.
But they
Yes.
weren't allowed to have friends, or they were
No.
allowed to have a single friend. No one was allowed at the house. You
Mm-mm.
weren't allowed to have friends at school,
Mm-mm.
or at least talk to anyone outside of
Mm-mm.
class. So you have
No
all of these things,
boyfriends, no
right? No
girlfriends.
boyfriend, which then I find super weird about Pixie. It's like, oh, hey, no boyfriend, no this, no that. You, boyfriend, you, marriage, you, children. And it's like,
But I think
again,
he did that. I do
to
not
cover.
think yes, he covered because he knew at that point that the neighborhoods and society well, I should say Canton, because this all happened in Canton, Ohio, which is only about 15, 20 minutes from
Yeah.
me, which is why this case is so intriguing to me. Um, but I think poor Joel, he had a crush on Pixie,
Yeah.
and I think he got pulled into the family, and he was accepted only for the fact that people were questioning
Yep.
where these 2 kids came from that Pixie gave birth to at 15 and 17, I think
Yep.
is yeah. So, and to have a daughter give birth at 15 and the parents just be like, "Oh," most kids are gonna be like, "Oh, my dad was pissed," or, "Oh,
Yep.
my mom lit me up," like
Yep.
and yes, teen
Well, and
pregnancy
think
happens
about
all
it,
the time, but
being so obsessed and in love with your father,
mhm,
to have him accept this boy that likes you, again, that mind
yes.
thing.
Well,
Like
and her
how
loyalty, the fact that
to her father
she
to the end.
she married this boy and she had a child with this boy to please her father,
Yep.
and her loyalty always fell to her father.
Yep.
I think she would have done anything
Yeah.
that he had asked her to do.
Wholeheartedly.
I mean, the simple fact that she was literally sleeping with her father because she wanted to be with him. That
Yep. No,
yeah,
and that was one of the things that Charlie said in one of the articles that I had read, that she truly, truly
yes.
was in love with him.
Mhm.
And it wasn't just, "Oh, I love my dad." This was
Yes,
like that guttural first love, "I love this human being." And it's
yes.
like, again, as a parent, you need to
Like,
just you need to teach that boundary.
she truly in one of the articles I read, she truly believed that he was, like, her soulmate,
Yeah. Yep.
which again but then, and I hate to make her sound like such a bad person because in reality,
She's brainwashed.
she didn't know any better.
Right.
She was raised in I think he made her marry him one of them was only 10 or 11. It was very young.
I think that was Sherry. I think
Okay,
yeah.
I know one of them was very young, and the other one I think was, like,
Yeah.
14-ish, which might have been Pixie because shortly after that, she was pregnant. But that thought jumped ship, sorry. We'll come back to that one.
So
That one was right out of it.
no, no, happens to me every day.
There's just
No,
so much
that's
of this
that's the hard
case.
part is that disassociation of how do I raise children and how do
Right,
I teach them right from wrong when I'm myself completely wrong.
right,
And so you're teaching them it's okay to do this, it's okay to do that. And she did. I truly believe she killed Skipper and didn't even think about it. Like
mm-mm,
dad said to shut him up or he's going to shut him up. I have to shut him up. And it was like
yeah,
quiet. And then the next thing you know, it's like, oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
baby's dead. Next.
Right. Well, and then the thing that I wanna know, and I was talking to somebody about this before the show, is that so I guess in my mind, in all the books and health books that I've ever read, is that if there is incest in a family, that those children normally do have some type of medical,
Yeah.
psychological, some type of issues. And those 2 little girls, I believe, are still alive. Um, Bill
I
asked
yeah.
well, Bill, dad, asked a great question. The mom and dad, yes, they're both dead. As far as I know, all of the children are still alive.
Yeah.
There were a couple that did try to commit suicide,
Yep.
which I don't condone that either, but I completely understand
Make the
where
pain stop. Yeah.
yes,
No,
I
Charlie was
completely
definitely open about trying to end things and he had said, I every time I was abused, every time I this happened, I didn't want to breathe. I prayed God would Jesus would take me.
And
Imagine
how
being
awful
that
is that?
young. Yeah. So imagine being that 10, 12, 17-year-old, knowing this is going on, knowing that you're
Mhm.
being abused and not
Well,
wanting to be on this planet.
well, and even as an adult, like you said earlier, as an adult, how do you trust somebody? Like for Charlie, for instance, like now you're an adult,
Yep.
you have a wife, you are probably going to have children.
Yep.
How do you explain to them what you went through and have them be understanding and have them show that empathy? Not everybody is strong enough to support somebody who was a victim of that type of abuse.
One
And
of the one of the best lines that he said was, "I may be a Sexton, but I am not my father. I am
yeah,
not Eddie Lee Sexton." And
and
that to me shows the strength of this man, that he fought for his
mhm,
siblings. He's created, from what I can see, a beautiful life for himself, his
mhm.
2 children, and his wife.
Yes, he is
He's
married with children.
Yes, he's
Mhm.
on this beautiful path,
Yeah.
and, he did right.
Mhm.
He gave himself his second chance. It
Yes.
wasn't that someone gave him his he gave himself. He said, "I'm not gonna be who my bloodline is." And
And
I
he
think there's a small part of us that can all take something from that.
yes, and and I think the things that he said are just incredible because mental illness, and I do think at some point that Eddie Lee had some type of mental
Oh, yeah.
illness. I don't know what it is. You can't just do this to people and think it's okay. And mental illness, sometimes it is hereditary, depending
Yep,
on what it is. And the fact that all 12 of these children, well, I'll say 11 because I don't know about Pixie. But these 11 children were able to take this experience of the two people they were supposed to trust in the entire world do these things to them.
yep,
And a lot of them did move on. They grew up, they had families, they've stayed out of trouble,
yep,
and one of the things I loved that I read was Willie, because he did have the mental capacity of a child. He got out of jail at 2000 in 2007 and he's laid low. He's been in no trouble. He's
yep,
had no issues with the law and he's living life and they're trying to make this awful terrible situation and make something of it.
yep.
And Charlie, for one, I assume he's probably an incredible dad because he's
I
probably
can
the type
imagine.
of dad
Yep,
that he didn't get to have,
yep.
and it's a sad story. And I mean, I'm an awful person for saying this. I wish Eddie would have got what what he deserved.
Yeah,
I
because you're a
wish.
mom and because, again, you can't imagine allowing your children to feel that way and allowing your
Yeah,
children to suffer in any way. I feel bad when my kid's got a hangnail. Like, I can't
yeah,
imagine being like, "Oh, I'm done having sex with you now. Go to bed."
right. Like,
On
here's
what
a towel,
planet is
clean
that
up. Like,
Yeah.
what the hell?
My
Yeah,
kid's
no.
crying because she's upset because you just attacked her sexually, or she knows that her sister's in the other room getting the same thing she got,
Right.
or her brother, or that to me, you don't do that. Those are things that you do not do as a parent. I don't care. Don't have children. If you cannot fathom being a good human being,
Mhm.
some people just don't
Well,
have it in them, but
and I think that should
don't
just be human
procreate.
nature. I think
Yeah,
you should never you should never have that urge to want to hurt a child.
or an
Like,
animal or anything.
or an animal. No, and let's
Karma.
and let's be honest, children, yes, they can be annoying at sometimes, and you just
Yeah.
want to be like, "Oh god, shut up."
Yep.
But to physically wanna hurt a child, like, that's not
No.
okay.
Nope.
And ugh, I wish with all of my heart that Eddie Lee Sexton would have been put into General Pop and just let the cards fall.
One person needed to know that story for everything to end differently.
I would you know what? If I don't know if they can get in trouble, and I will never work in a prison, so I'm gonna say it. If
No, I
I
like the haunted ones. Just stick with the haunted ones.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'll just stick with the haunted prisons. Even there, they give me issues,
Right?
but I'll never work in a prison. So, if I was a guard or a police officer, you know what? I would have absolutely been like, "Hey, we have a guy coming in tomorrow that raped all 12 of his children, beat them, and fathered 2 children with a daughter." And I would have just let it play out because
12C.
at the end of the day, nothing that happened to him would have made up for what he did to those kids
He
for
lied so
years.
much, somebody would eventually called him out on his lie, and I think that's probably why they immediately put him in kind of solitary or on death row, because they knew he wouldn't last 5 minutes, and I think there were people that wanted to see justice done, and
Okay.
unfortunately,
Well, another
you know.
upside.
Yep.
He doesn't last 5 minutes. That's a lot of tax dollars saved.
Right.
That's a lot of time on death row. That's an open cell. Like,
Yep.
mm-mm.
No,
Or
it's hard because I don't wish death on anyone, I don't wish harm on anyone, even if you've
mhm.
done something this horrible, but listen, there's that human side of you that's like,
That's
"You
why
did
you're a
something
better
you
person than I am because I would have been like, "Hey, he did this. Take him out back and execute him." Like,
Yeah. Maybe it's old age. Maybe I'm just at the point where I'm like, "Meh, let Jesus take care of that." Because
well, oh no, I
probably
would let
15 years
Jesus
ago,
take
I
care
would
of
have
it
been like,
too.
"Hold my earrings, like, let's go."
Oh, see, and I would have been like, "Yes, Jesus is gonna take care of it, but
But
I'm
I'm
gonna
gonna
send you
first.
there a little bit quicker." Yes. Because
I have that express pass.
yeah, here you go. Here's your it's like Cedar Point. You could
Yep,
just stick a line.
yep. That
But
Disney Easy Pass. Swipe that bad boy.
I mean, for somebody and oh, gosh, and this is completely off topic, but it irks me because there are really, really good people
Yeah.
who die young. There are people who would give you the shirt off their back. They are truly amazing people, and
Yep.
they die so young. And then there's people like this
Yep.
who get to experience life. And, there's people out there who can't have children, and then he can have 12.
Yep.
And I know it's not my place to understand, but this is where it's hard for me because I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Just why?
Yeah. No,
But
I'm right there with you. I need those answers too. Why is one person allowed to do one thing and
yes.
one isn't? And it makes you question your faith, and it makes you question a lot of things. And I think that's, again, part of everyone's journey. And I think
Mhm,
that was, again, to see these kids become these amazing human beings, and
mhm,
none of them seem to have been in trouble. Eddie
mhm,
Jr., I know, had left and he started
mhm.
a family, and he is the best dad. He made some mistakes. He did go to jail for a little while. But
Right.
you know what? It seems like he's doing all right now. And you see little things,
Mhm.
and they've all laid pretty low. Like, I'll be honest, deep diving and trying to really research, you find the same articles, you find different
Yes.
things, you find different pieces. Somebody says it was a van, somebody says it was a car, one
Right.
says it's an RV. But the bottom line is, this father and mother did horrible things to their
Mhm,
children. These kids got
mhm,
redemption. They used their second chance.
mhm.
And,
Yeah.
it seems like everything's kind of okay. And I hope that wherever Skipper is and Joel is, that they're
Mhm.
together and that they're happy. I hope they're looking down on these decisions that were made now and saying, you know
Yeah.
what? We got justice. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone ever has complete justice when you pass or are murdered or are killed in any way. But,
Yeah.
I hope that souls get healed on the other side in some capacity.
Well, and I hope for Joel's family too, because, you know, he
Their
was
boy was
young.
taken.
He was only like 18 or
20?
9 was he 20? I don't even think he lived to be 20. He was young. Maybe he was I know he wasn't 21. He was young, but, and, another thing that is
Look at my
kind of
notes.
hard to find, I don't really know if it's mentioned anywhere. Now this whole case, there is a book that
Oh, yeah.
goes into very, very graphic details about this case and goes into more than what you can find online. And it's called House of Secrets. And I read this book, I think, when I was in high school. It's probably still in my dad's attic.
That
But
box that we all have.
yeah, that box, randomly at my dad's attic, I still have. Um, but one of the things in the book that I read that I was not able to find online was at one point, and I might get which child it was wrong, but I believe Eddie Lee was angry, and I think it might have been Charles. And he took Eddie Jr. to his house, gave him a gun, and said, "You knock on that door, and if your brother answers, you shoot him in the chest."
So that was
Was it Eddie and Charles? No,
so
okay, I read
no,
this
it
like
was
20 years
Charles.
ago.
So
So,
Eddie Jr. was living in Ohio with
yeah,
his wife. This was right after Skipper had died.
yeah,
And they were going, so essentially Joel was clearly traumatized that his son had just died, or who he thought was his son.
yes,
And Eddie Sr.'s response was, "Well, we'll just get another baby." So to keep the bloodline pure,
Oh,
he knew
okay.
that his oldest son had just had a child within a couple months of how old Skipper was.
Yeah.
And he had driven the boys to
The
Junior's
house.
house and said to Charles, "You're going to go to that door, you're going to knock on it, and when your brother answers the door, you're going to shoot him in the face and you're going to take his child, and then we're
Okay.
going to go home."
Let's say it's been about 20 years since I read that
Yeah.
book, so
Yep.
I maybe
Yep.
longer in showing my
So, and
age.
it was basically 24th high school reunion this year, so I get it. So yeah, so imagine being that in that car. Imagine being in that car, driving to your brother's
Mhm.
house and being like, "Wow, this looks familiar," and then being handed a loaded gun and say, "Hey,
Yes.
go." And thank God that day, just side note, Junior wasn't home. N-
Yes, thank God.
Nobody answered that door. So not only was his life saved, his child's life was saved, Charles' life was saved, but
Mhm.
that was kind of then the end of going back to that campground. They
Yes.
couldn't console Joel. He was going to tell, he was going to dig the baby up, bring it to the police station and say, "We don't know what happened, but my child's dead." And daddy wasn't having that. So
Yeah.
that's where
Well,
that lovely walk into the woods happened.
yes, and unfortunately, we are running really short on time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation. I know
Oh,
that
this was
I could go on for
painfully fun.
hours.
Oh,
I
there's
could go
so
on for
much.
hours. But I do wanna say that after this, there is Afterlife Chronicles with Nicole Strickland, and she is talking about the Queen Mary, so that is a show that you're not gonna wanna miss because everybody knows about the fabulous, beautiful, and historical Queen Mary. So make sure to stay on and tune into Nicole's Afterlife Chronicles. Next week, Rini will be back on, and she has an incredible guest that I'm not going to spill the beans, but it's another one that you're going to want to tune into. It is a guest who has firsthand experience in some trauma, but he's turned it around and made it an incredible story. So stay tuned with that. And I want to thank Katie for being on here so I didn't have to talk to myself. You did fantastic.
Well,
And
thank
I'm
you very
happy
much
that
for
you were
having me.
able to join me.
Thanks for blowing my mind this week and making me have to relive my therapy and call my therapist on this. I truly
We'll,
appreciate you for that. But
we'll
no,
have
this has been
we'll have
fun.
wine night. Yeah.
Oh, we're going to. We're
But
going to.
thank you
But thank you.
guys.
I appreciate this.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for watching. Like I said, stay on for Nicole with Afterlife Chronicles, and we will see you next week. Bye,
Bye.
guys.